So it's part 2 of lesson 10. So hopefully you've been able to grab anything that you needed from GitHub. Okay, let's go back and see some questions about session status. So you'll notice here when I'm going to go back to my header. You'll see what it means in a minute. So I'm going to comment out. You don't have to do this, but I'm going to comment out my check here. So before we can check a session variable, we must call session start, which initializes session data. So watch what happens without it. So I'm going to log out. First, as an anonymous user, I can go and view my movies. That's fine. But once I log in, when I try to go here to movie details, notice I get this warning. It says on line 35 of header, where we're calling session start, we get this warning. We are ignoring it because the session is already active. So let's look at the workflow on movie details. We call auth, and auth is already checking and calling session start. So we can't, when we go to call session start, so now on movie details, then we call our header and all our HTML roads, and then we get down here, and when we call session start again, PHP throws a warning. It says you can't call session start again. So in order to prevent session start being called twice, this session status, this will tell us if session start has already been called. So we can only call session start once per page request. It's getting called in auth. So if it's been called once already, we don't want to call it again. Okay, Belinda, great question. I'll show you why. Let's try that, right? So why don't we just call it an auth? So I'll just comment this out. Okay? Good idea. Here's why. So I'm just going to start again. I'm going to log out. So I'm going to go to movies. I'll try to add a movie. So this seems to work when I'm logged out, right? No errors. I can go to movies. I don't get any error. I try and access my restricted page. All that seems to be working correctly, right? However, watch what happens when I try that same workflow when I'm logged in. So far, so good. But now I'm going to go to my restricted page. Here's why. Notice what happens. This is why. Sorry. Let me log in again. I missed it. I'm going to log in. Here's why, Belinda. Because we use the session. Notice I'm logged in now. I clicked login. It brought me to the movies page. But notice in our header, if we don't call session start, then which links show up? I just logged in. Again, I'll do it again. I click login. I put in the valid username and password. It takes me to the right page, but our logic in our nav bar, it's still saying register and log in. So without calling session start, because remember, our movies page is public. So movies does not include auth, right? This is a public page. If we look at the top of movies.php, there's no inclusion of the auth file because this page is public. So we don't call auth means we don't call session start, which means in our header, our session username will always evaluate to empty. So the user always sees these links even when they've logged in. I'm glad you asked that question. Does this make sense now? Josh, and what does it mean? It's telling us, have we already called session start, yes or no? We can't read or write session variables. So here are the rules. There's 3 rules in PHP with session. I'll put them in the chat. Rule 1, we must call session start to read or write session variables. I'm going to put this in the chat. You can see it on my screen as well. So rule 1, we must call session start to read or write session bars. Rule 2, we can only call session start once per HTML request, or we get an error. Right? We saw that when I called session start twice, once in auth and once in the header, there was a message printed in my nav bar that says session start has already been called. So we've got to call session start in order to use the session object, but we can only do it once per page. Session status is like a flag that tells us whether session start has already been called in this request. Sorry, I meant to put a 3. So those are the 3 things you need to know about using session start and session status. We've got to call session start to be able to access a session variable. We can only call it one time, and session status basically is a flag that tells us whether session start has already been called or not. PHP handles this terribly. In other web programming languages, we can just call session variables. There's no such thing as session start. So this is a bit of kind of messy internal plumbing that PHP requires of us. Okay, you're asking all the right questions about sessions. If you're finding it confusing, that's normal. So we need to do a few more things. We need to secure access to our save and delete pages by including the auth file. And then we need to modify the user interface so that the add and delete links are hidden and the movie titles are not clickable when our user is anonymous. I'm going to open up delete movie, and we're going to convert this from a public page that anyone can access to a private page simply by requiring our auth file. So now no one can delete a movie if they're anonymous. So I'll try this here in Chrome, I'm anonymous. So I'm going to go to delete movie.php. And it just takes me back to the login screen right away. So we've now converted our delete page from public to private. You must be logged in to delete a movie. Okay, that's a good point, Daniel. So here was my movie ID 1000. Aha, okay, it did. So in our auth, the other thing we will add here is exit. So stop executing. Belinda, that's the right idea, yes. You have the right concept. But if we do it in our header, then we don't need to do it again. If we, let's say we want to use session variables a bunch more on the rest of the page, we only have to call the session start once in our header, which is at the top of the page. And then we could read or write session data below it. So long as session start has been called one time. So like on our movie details page, we're not using any session data here. We're really only using the session data in the header itself. But as long as we include the header first, and the header, and we include auth, as long as session start is called in one of these files, we can then use session variables anywhere here. You've got the right idea. Each page request, Hamid. That's right, Belinda. So any page like movie details, if the page uses auth, well, auth is starting the session. The header also uses it. So if I just call session start without this if check, then I get an error saying session start has already been called. So some pages that use the header will use auth and some will not. Right. So just to be sure, I'm going to use this same if statement before I call session start to make sure it only is called one time. If it's called in auth, I don't want to call it in the header. But if my page is public and doesn't use auth, then we need to call it in the header. So in our auth, we also add this exit, and I'm going to try that again now. I'll try to delete a movie without being logged in. This time I'll make it movie 1001. So now my movie 1001, it's still here. So the delete page is private. Yes, right at the top of delete movie, very first line is authentication check. Don't run any of the other code until we know this user has logged in. That's called session start. And we are checking to make sure there is a session variable called username. If there isn't, take them to the login and don't execute any more code. So that's our first line. We're also going to put it on our save movie page. Again, as the very first line. You cannot save a movie if you are not logged in. So I'm going to copy that require statement. So we're converting these public pages to private pages. So a user can no longer insert, update, or delete if they have not logged in and they don't have an active session. So we've taken 3 of our pages that were public, our movie details, to figure out what's going on here. Our nav bar is not quite working. Not sure why. Okay, something in our logic isn't quite right. When I go to index and movies, isn't quite right. We'll figure out why in a moment. And now I want to change these links. Yours is all good. Okay, let me log in again. See, I'm on my movies page. Oh, I think I just didn't, I undid it to try to answer Belinda's question. I don't think I saved my changes, that's why. Yeah, I just have to put my changes back. I hadn't saved. Yeah, there we go. So I navigate around, I'm logged in. So now we want to make some changes to movies.php. It's a public page, but we want to do what Blackboard does. We want to show or hide certain elements within the page, depending on whether the user is logged in, like I am in Firefox, or whether the user is anonymous, like I am in Chrome. So we're going to go back to our movies page, and we're going to add some if statements to show or hide certain things on the page. So the first if statement has got to go around this link on line 6. So what should we be doing with this link so that an authenticated user will see it and an anonymous user will not see it? What will we do? We're not going to delete line 6. Well, at the moment, it's the same, Belinda. Right, we want to add PHP. Okay, so yes, Sarah, there's a few different ways. We could add it, a visibility class, or, yeah, so we're going to add PHP, Josh. And so what's the PHP going to say? So I'm going to put PHP around this link, but we need to do some more with it. What should happen in our PHP here? We could use CSS, but then the link's still going to show up in the source of the page. So what do we want to check here? How do we know whether to show this link or not? Right, you got it, Sarah. So we'll say if not empty, right? We can use our session variable. So if our session variable called username isn't empty, we will just echo the link. Ta-da. Okay. Tyler, we can't run the auth script because if they're not, the auth script takes them to the login page. So we don't want to take them to the login page in this case. They can still look at the list of movies if they're anonymous, but they won't see the link to add. Belinda, that's exactly right. Okay, so here's my question. Let's try this out and see if it works. So open the site in 2 browsers. Log in one browser, stay anonymous in the other. Okay, so I'm going to save this change. So a simple if statement that will show the link if our user is logged in. So in Firefox, I'm logged in. Right? So I still have this link to add a movie. In Chrome, when I click my movies link now, notice I'm anonymous because I'm prompted to register and log in, so my link disappears. So this is the right behavior. An anonymous user no longer sees the link, an authenticated user does. And in fact, I won't even see it at all here in the source, right? I can't even see this link in Chrome where I'm anonymous. So here's a question for you. Why do we need not to call, yes, Daniel, why didn't we call session start here? If you think back to the rules I put in the chat, I said before accessing a session variable, we needed to call session start. We didn't call session start here, yet this code works. Right? In Firefox, when I'm logged in, here's my link. In Chrome, I'm not logged in, I don't see it. So why don't we call session start here? Thank you, Belinda and Tyler. Because the header is called first, and the header says, hey, if we haven't called session start, call it. Exactly. I'll put in a note, we don't need to call session start. First, because we already called it in the header above. So now we need to we'll deal with the delete links, and then we'll deal with the movie titles last. They'll be a little more complicated. So here's what I'm going to do. We're going to take this same if statement and repeat it several times. First of all, here, around our actions heading, we're not going to include this heading if our user's not logged in. They're not even going to see this column. But we've got to treat the header and then the delete links separately. So in our header row, I'm just going to copy that if statement right here. And then I'm going to take my actions heading and cut it. And I'm just going to put that into our echo statement instead. Okay, so we don't even have to type any new code here. I just copied this if statement from above, and I just changed the content of the echo statement. So if somebody's logged in, we will show them this table header that says action. Now that doesn't hide the red buttons yet. That'll just hide that heading at the top. So an anonymous user in Chrome, I'm going to see 4 headings. In Firefox, where I'm authenticated, I'm going to see 5 headings. So here I am, I'll refresh in Firefox, 5 column headings, but now in Chrome, notice the word actions is gone as well. And then we're going to use that if statement twice inside our table loop. We'll deal with the delete first. So what I'm going to do is after printing out my movie name, I'm going to terminate that echo statement that starts all the way up here. So I've added a single quote and a semicolon after movie name and close that column. And now I'm going to use my if statement. If, not empty, and I'll put in a new echo command and single quote. So our delete column with our red delete button, this only shows up when our user is logged in, and then I need an echo down here. Okay, so I've broken this one echo command into three. Before, this was one long echo statement where we printed out a row, we printed out 5 columns, and we closed the row. Now we're going to start our row and print out 4 columns. At the bottom, we're still going to end the row, but this 5th column is now wrapped in our authentication check. So an anonymous user is no longer going to see those delete links. We'll also have to deal with the edit links after. We'll just give this a shot. So everything is normal in Firefox. I still have access to all my features. But in Chrome, I now only see 4 columns. Add and delete are completely gone. I don't even know those exist. We're going to add a similar but a little different check in our first column. An authenticated user is going to be able to click on the movie title, but an anonymous user is just going to get a read-only. It's just going to be printed in HTML. The title will not be a link anymore that they can click. So inside my first column, I'm going to wrap this also in an if statement. So we need one more if statement here, and then this approximates what we see on Blackboard every day, where all of us are looking at the same actual page, but we see different things based on these kinds of security checks. Different elements, mostly elements that are visible to me, are made invisible to you. So after our first PD, I'm going to end that echo statement. And then I will add my if in here. So we'll say if not empty, and again, I'm going to move my original text in here. So when our user is logged in, print the movie title and make it a link. Otherwise, we are just going to echo the movie title as plain HTML. It's not going to be clickable. And then I need to start an echo statement here. I'll put this all on GitHub shortly so you can compare your code if something's not working. So anonymous users will see the movie names as plain HTML that is not clickable. Authenticated users will be able to click on a movie title to see the details and edit. I'm just going to try this to make sure it's correct. It looks pretty good. So as an authenticated user, I see these links, which I can click, and they're active. As an anonymous user, this is now just a read-only data table, right? There's no underline, there's no cursor, and when I click, nothing happens. So we've created, in effect, two versions of the same page in a single file. I know the code's complicated and messy. I won't argue that. It is, however, fully functional now. So an anonymous user, all they can do is look at our data, and they've got to authenticate. As soon as they authenticate, once they authenticate, then they can go in and add, edit. Well, Hamid, we haven't built that functionality. We have no way to do that right now. Because the movies are not tied to particular users. Right? If we look in the database, we would have to add a user ID foreign key. We'd have to do a bunch of changes also that when we saved a movie, we were attaching the user ID to it. So we haven't built the site to do that. But I do want to make sure that I can still add a movie. Let's see. I think we got an error here, so let's figure out why. Okay, so what's happening here? Right, yet an error. Let's see, I'm going to take out my try catch now to figure out what's wrong. I will take out my catch. I want this to fail. I'm commenting out my try catch. Let's see what happens. Okay. My favorite, number of bound variables doesn't match number of tokens. Oh, I think the problem is here. I used isSet, which is not a good check in my save. Determine if the variable is declared. It is set because I initialized it. So I will say, if not empty. So when we're saving a movie, rather than using isSet, I'll say if it's not empty. I'll try again. Okay, so now I can save a movie. And I'll check I can delete as well when I'm logged in. Go to delete. And now when I go to delete it, okay. So I did have another bug to fix on Save Movie. An old bug I guess I didn't catch before. I think someone emailed me about it. So now I can put my try catch back in. Yeah, I maybe did and I didn't do it in my own. So we'll use not empty rather than is set for that variable. So our basic authentication is pretty much done now. The last edit on movies. Sure. The last edit was this section. I will publish all this to GitHub shortly. But the last change I made was here. This was our original code. We just had the movie detailed link. So I've now wrapped that in an if statement, depending on whether our user is logged in or not. Those movie titles may or may not be links. So we've been able to implement basic authentication now in the sense that we've restricted access to our add, edit, and delete pages and links. So somebody's got to be logged into the site to change anything, any movie data. As an anonymous user, we can still look at the data, but we have no ability to add, edit, or delete, even if we try and call those URLs directly. We're locked out from all of these. If I go to delete something, whoops, didn't mean to click login, but delete doesn't work. My movie 1001 is still here. And we can use this little auth file to check and make sure that anonymous users are blocked from accessing any private pages. We just want to make sure that that auth check, it should be the very first thing on any pages that need to be private. So check the authentication first, and if the user's not allowed in, take them to the login page and stop executing code. This should be the very first thing we do on any pages that need to be private. And then we can show or hide individual elements within a page by checking our session variable that an authenticated user will have and an anonymous user will not have. Okay, it is 9:40. Let's have a look. There are a couple of other security things we want to talk about. So we've provided auth checking on our list, form, save, and delete pages. We've created our navbar links. We've enabled logout. But I think we've got time. One of the other things we should do that we didn't do, what's on our register page? One of the other things we could do that most sites, many useful sites do now, and I think we have time to implement, is the ability to see your password. Now, we obviously don't want the password to be plain text, but what could we do? What do we see on many registration pages now so that before you submit your registration, you're able to confirm that the password has been typed? Yeah, we could add a little visibility toggle, which I think would be a useful feature. Later on, we are also going to add the reCAPTCHA API, which will help prevent bots from filling out our registration forms because they do that all the time. So we'll add that later as an additional security measure. But we can add a little script here with a little show or hide password that will toggle. It'll change the input type temporarily from a password input to a text input, and then it will toggle it back. Um, Tyler, I can't tell you a good reason. I can just tell you that it happens all the time. Mostly either where people are trying to get into your site, either to hack it and access your data. Maybe they want to have a way to attack your server through denial of service. But it is a real challenge for us. So I'm just going to upload a couple of images here to Blackboard. Bear with me and we can download them. Going to throw a show and hide. So I've got a little image folder. Okay, so if you can refresh your lesson 10 folder. Yes, Elena. It's automated, so it's not actually people that are filling out your form. It's a computer script that's trying to register. Yes, a robot, correct. So if you refresh your lesson 10, they've given you a little zip file here called IMG folder with show hide images. So if you click on that zip file, let's download it into our PHP Flicks. And then I'm going to go to my folder. And if you right click that zip file, just go in your Finder, your Windows Explorer, and just extract it here. And that creates a little folder called IMG, and there are two images here, a show and hide. And I can delete the zip folder. I don't need the zip file. So you should now see an IMG directory. So we're going to display, by default, we want the show image to appear here beside the password button on our register form. So I'll go to my register page. And here's my password input. So beside it, I'm going to add from Blackboard. I've uploaded into the lesson 10 folder. a little zip file. I've downloaded it to my folder and extracted it. It creates a folder called IMG, and it includes these two icons in PNG format. And then I'm going to add an image that defaults to the show. I've added it beside my password input on register.php. So now my register page, I get this little eye showing. So we want to use a little JavaScript that when we type in here and click show, it will convert the type, the input type from password to text. That'll let us see the characters that we've entered. It's okay, it's why I record them. I know you're doing your best. Don't panic. You can always use GitHub and YouTube to catch up later. So we're going to add a little JavaScript into our scripts file that we can then call when this image, actually, I need to give this image an ID as well. So I will give it an ID of show hide. I know, Belinda, exactly. Yeah, I do my best. The questions are great. Obviously, I can't help debug every, oops. I do my best to help debug. I can't always solve every student's every problem during class. I do what I can, trying to be mindful of our time and what we want to get through as well. So let's go to our scripts file. We will toggle password input on register form. So we'll create a function called show hide password. So we're going to access the password input. So we're going to toggle both the input type as well as change the image. So we'll say if if it's a password box where we cannot see the characters, like this, we're going to change it to text. And then we're going to change the image source from show to hide. We'll then have an else condition that'll do the opposite. If it's text, we're going to toggle it back to password. And we're going to change the icon back to show. So when we click the icon, we're changing both the input type and the icon. We click it again, we're going to change them back. So now we need to add just an event handler to our little icon here that when we click it, it will run this JavaScript. So then the user can see and then hide their password. So just some basic JavaScript. I don't think there's anything too revolutionary here. You're all taking client-side JavaScript this semester, I believe. We know how to use document.getElementById by now, and then we can alter the properties. There's different ways of doing this. This is just fairly simple. So I will go back to register, and I want to add a click handler here. That whenever we click the icon, it then calls our little method in our JavaScript file. So I'm going to try this out, and then I think we're about due for a break. And we don't have a lot left to cover, just a few things. Most of our coding is done for today. There's just a couple other security resources I will point you to. So I've added this click handler, and now I'll try it out. So I type in, some password, and now when I click the show button, Daniel, that's probably based on your browser. So when I click it, notice my password characters are visible and my icon changes from the show to the hide. I click it again and they reverse. My password again becomes unreadable and my hide icon turns back to the show. Now there is one other thing we should do here with JavaScript that we didn't do. We'll do that when we come back. Right now, there's no check on the client side that the passwords match. I'm going to put it up on GitHub, Sarah. Okay, so we're going to take a break here. When we come back, the one other thing we need is to write another script that when we submit the form, we should be checking using JavaScript to prevent a form submission if the passwords don't match. I know we're checking on the next page, but we should also be checking here. And then we're going to talk a little bit about SSL and the OWASP project, and we're done for today. So give me a moment. Everything will be up on GitHub in a minute. And we will take a break. Sorry, Elena, I don't quite understand.